The Dale Show! Hi, everybody. It's Dale from The Dale Show. And this week, I have a guest, my lovely girlfriend, Andrea. Don't want to say her name because she's not sure if she wants to put her name on this yet because I might embarrass her. Because unlike me, she doesn't have the, I guess, um, the, well, I'm going to edit this out because I can't think of a word. What's
Red
that word?
pill?
The what?
I'm not red pilled
No,
enough.
well, not that either. But that one word where like it's like an accessory, but it's not. It's like an advantage. Well, I guess there. I'll just use advantage instead of the big word that I can't think of. She doesn't have the advantage of me, like me, of being a welder, where I can say whatever the fuck I want on the internet and nobody's gonna give a shit because I work with blue collar people who don't really go on the internet. It's actually pretty awesome. And I guess when you do daily affirmations, I should start saying that that's one thing I'm more glad to have in my life than I do. So this week we're going to talk about the Templar Knights. Andrea, what do you know about the Templar Knights? Do you know anything coming in?
Nope. Remember we tried to listen to that audiobook and I got car sick?
In the car. That's one of my main sources on 2 points is Dan Jones. He wrote a book called The Templars, and I was listening to the audiobook, and it is dry. So I don't blame Andrea for not being able to listen to it. I was listening to it at work while I was doing other stuff. So it's like, even though it is boring, I can sit through it. Like I wouldn't be able to just read the book, which I can't really read books anyway because they're too boring to do one thing at once. So I like to listen to an audiobook while I'm working with my hands, either like doing a craft or at work, welding, or like drawing or playing video games. But I can't really just do a book unless it's like the most exciting book that's ever happened. I mentioned one of my sources being the book The Templars by Dan Jones. He was also on a podcast called History Extra, put out by BBC, which I know I just complained about how dry the book was, but if you listen to a history podcast by BBC, it's actually not as dry, but it tries. And then the other podcast I listened to was Earth Ancients, who had the guest Scott Wolter, who was he wrote a book called Templar Knights in America. So he didn't do any of the dry background stuff of the Templar Knights. He was all like batshit theories about how after the fall of the Templar Knights in the 1300s, they secretly went to North America and interbred with the indigenous people to put the bloodline of Christ into North America to kind of keep it safe from King Philip IV, who tried to like take down the Knights, or even anybody else who took down the Knights.
I remember you actually told me about that.
Yeah. Which is funny because you guys you guys remember how like 5 seconds ago I was telling you about this boring book I was listening to. I tried to get the one by Scott Wolter. It's not on Audible. And then I tried to get this other book by Malcolm Barbera, I think his name is. He has a Templar Knights book, but it is also not on Audible. But that book was the main source for my next source, which was the Secret Societies podcast, The Knights Templar Part 1 and 2, where they were using the Malcolm Barbera book as their main information thing.
Source of information.
Yeah. Okay. So are you ready for this? Are you ready to learn about the Templar Knights?
Am I ready? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do this.
So I asked
You
Andrea
may have to summarize, just so you know. Periodically, I might be like, all right, we have to recap because
that's why you're here, actually, because when I did the first 3 episodes, I would kind of start talking about some and then get sidetracked. And then I'd go back when I was processing it afterwards, and I would just be like, oh, I never went back to that thing I started talking about, and I kind of just jump all
Mm-hmm.
over the place. So you're here as a person to try. I mean, you could
I am
try.
a sounding board,
Yes, and I imagine I will still
which
go
is
off the
not
rails.
super flattering or fun. I don't.
You're more than a
I
soundboard to me,
don't get to
Andrea.
be. Yeah. We hope anyway.
So the Templar Knights started after the First Crusade. So should I cover the Crusades at all? I don't know much about. Okay, here's what we'll say about the Crusades, because it kind of leads into the Templar Knights, like the whole reason why the Western Christians went to the east to take over Jerusalem and stuff was they, where I wrote it down here. So the Western Christians saw Jerusalem as the seed or kernel of all societies, where they, back then, there was no like out of Africa, out of Europe thing. They had believed that all of society came out of Jerusalem and it just kind of sprouted out. So they figured that if they went back to the religious city that was at the time, I wanted to say currently, but in the story it's currently, but that might confuse you. So at the time of the First Crusades, it was held by the Muslims, and the Christians wanted to overtake it because they felt that their powers and basically the favor from God would be concentrated and be more pure if they prayed from Jerusalem. So it would be like, it would have like a kind of like a multiplication effect
Mm-hmm.
on their prayers and the holiness of them and their
Get it?
faith if it comes through
Because it's the
Jerusalem.
holy place.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, the Holy Land. So they, in 1095, Pope Urban II proclaimed the First Crusade at the Council of Clermont. He encouraged military support for Byzantine Emperor Alexios I against the Seljuk Turks and called for an armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And one of the big things that he promised was, where I wrote it down. So he promised all, like, because the Crusades, like, you hear about it and you're like, was that just a whole bunch of knights and military? And it was, but most of the people on the Crusades were just pilgrims, like farmers who just took up arms and stuff. And the reason they were convinced to do so was Pope Urban II said, hey, if you go on this crusade, you don't have to do any more penance. Like, you're guaranteed to get into heaven if you go fight in this holy war. And since this was back before, like, this was back in the time when people couldn't even read the Bible or anything, like there was no translation of it. It was still, they're getting it fed to them from priests and stuff. And society was still the feudal system. And the way that the rich people convinced the poor people to stay poor was, they're like, yo, you're poor because God wants you to be poor. So if you rise up against the people holding you down, then you're rising up against God. So basically God was like big brother, and they used God to keep everybody in place. So the promise of being in God's favor for just going on the crusade was tantamount. So that's basically how they convinced farmers to pick up weapons and go. Also, they kind of had this rule that whatever you killed, you could plunder. So I imagine there was a lot of farmers who like saw it as
Whoever you killed, you mean, not whatever.
well, like if you killed a village, you got to plunder the village.
Yeah.
But you're
Well,
right. Like
whoever though. Yeah.
whoever you killed, you got to plunder. And yeah, so that would actually come into play later on in the story with the Templar Knights, where they actually effed themselves in this one big battle because they didn't want anybody else to plunder them. So they all went in and then they got murdered. Okay. So how do you want me to tell you about this, Andrew? Do you want me to just go straight through the timeline as the years go by, or do you want to kind of have some flavor?
I think your well-crafted timeline sounds good. Sounds
Okay.
efficient.
It's funny because all the information I was taking in about the Templar Knights, they're always like, you can't do a timeline of this stuff. It's too big and too crazy to talk about. There's no way you can make sense of it. And I was like, that doesn't how can you not have a timeline? You just
Mm.
write down the year and say what happened that year. So that's what I did. So
Wait,
apparently I did the impossible.
yeah. I have a question for you before we start,
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Mr. DeRuiter.
Yes.
Why did you choose this topic? Why is this topic so interesting to you?
Well, the way I run the show is I'm just like, what should I talk about next? And then I'll just like, whatever, I'll let it simmer. And then the whatever idea pops into my brain, I'll be like, oh, should I talk about that? And I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, but the Templar Knights popped in because what was it? I don't know. There's something to do with the Templar Knights popped in and they're like, and you know how the Templar Knights are, haha. And I was like, I don't really know too much about them. I know that they're like a basically the boogeyman of secret societies and stuff. So I was like, why don't I go research them?
Mm.
So like I said, like sometimes they're the boogeyman. Like a lot of people believe that the Templar Knights are the true force behind like the Illuminati and the Freemasons and stuff. They think that in 1307 to 1314, when Philip was breaking down the Templar Knights, they're saying that some of them got away. Like Scott Wolter said that they got away to North America to interbreed with the indigenous people and secure the lifeblood or the lifeline of Christ. Some other
Yeah.
people are saying that they went and like they went to North America and other areas because the one thing they never got in Europe and the Crusades was their own kind of country where they could do whatever they want. Like the reason the Templars got so powerful was because the Pope gave them. Okay, I'm gonna get to that because that's like the second part of the timeline is what I was just about to say. So let's just start the timeline. Are you
All
okay with
right.
that? Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to know why this was like particularly appealing to you. If there was something you were fascinated with about that. But I think you've answered that reasonably well.
Yeah, I
Sounds
think
like
I've
you'll tell me more along the way.
yeah, another reason too is I've always liked knights and chivalry and stuff like that. And also like
Yes,
they're like
right?
this the
How we
sea
joke about you being a past life knight.
yeah,
This is
and
true, folks. This is
how
an ongoing joke.
what was I gonna say? Oh, and how like the Templars are like, ooh, it's a secret. And of course I want to know secrets. And then just kind of how they they kind of took advantage of everybody's religious beliefs and got super rich and powerful as they went. Okay. So as I was saying, in 1095, Pope Urban II announced that they're going to have a crusade. They're all going to march over to Jerusalem and take it over. And then, if you want to know
Wait,
more about
wait,
the,
sorry. Who is
okay,
they when you say they? Which people are these?
I think in the first crusade, I think it was. I'm just going to go by modern countries because they say stuff like Burberry and Flemish and all that stuff, and I don't really know where those are. Like I could do more research, but I'm not going to. So
Hmm.
basically, when I say they, I mean the Holy Roman Empire and which or whatever was left of the Holy Roman Empire, which was like Italy and Constantinople,
Okay.
which turned into I can't remember. What's Constantinople right now? I was going to write this down because they always talk about Constantinople in this.
Could
Anyways,
we
I'm sorry.
Google that very
Yeah,
quickly?
I'll Google that after and I'll put it in the subtext of the video. Okay, so the Crusades were basically the most powerful countries were Spain, France, Italy, Europe, and Germany. Like it was the big heavy hitters of Europe. And of course, they had intermingling wars, like there's the Flemish War later on. And then after this was the Hundred Years' War between France and England. But it was kind of like they're like, we don't agree on stuff, but we all need to take the Holy Land because we're all Christians and we want God to hear our prayers. And the Muslims have the Holy Land right now. So we got to get them out. So they're all like, okay, we agree. Because even though the Holy Roman Empire had fallen, there was still the Holy Roman Pope. And he was kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of awkward. It's kind of hard to describe it because it's like it's more and less powerful in different countries. Like in some of them, like I think like France, they had the king and the pope were almost the same level of power. Whereas if you go to Germany, the pope had a little bit less power, and England even less. And then Portugal and Spain, I think it had a little bit more. So it's kind of waxed and waned with how much power the pope had in these countries, but they're all like Christian brethren, I guess you could say. So that's who I mean by they. Good question, Dan.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
on
Maybe we need to clarify that a bit later too.
yeah,
To be
so they
fair.
go in, and on July 15th, 1099, the Christians win Jerusalem. So they kicked out the Muslims and they took over. And then, like, one thing that happened a lot was people like pilgrims from Europe, Western Europe, would go to the eastern part, like in books and stuff a lot they call it Western and Eastern Christians. So if you ever hear me say Western Christians and Eastern Christians, the Western Christians I'm talking about are the ones from Spain, Germany, France, Italy, Germany, and England, whereas the Eastern Christians are the ones from the Holy Land. And they set up four kind of little countries in the Holy Land. So there was the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Where did I write this down? Okay, there's the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Odessa. So there's these four, I don't know, they call them states. They kind of don't really go over the whole power structure of it. And I guess I could find out if I went more into the Crusades, but it doesn't quite matter as much to the Templar Knights. So I didn't kind of like look into politics at the time.
Mm,
Any questions so far?
all right. Nope.
So there's this fella, his name's Hugh de Pan, or Hugh de Payens. Basically, he's a knight and he's in the Holy Land. He's in the Kingdom of Jerusalem and he's hanging out. And he's noticing that the pilgrims that are coming over to go look at all the different stuff, like the different holy relics in the holy areas, like there's the Temple of Solomon and stuff, and uh the place where they buried Jesus. And then there's like pieces, there's like this one church that has a cross, a piece of the actual cross that Jesus was on, and it's like all mounted up and stuff. So pilgrims would come from Europe and they come look at this. And of course they wanted some of that sweet holy action to like get their holiness multiplied. So they'd go there and they'd be like, I'm definitely going to heaven because I came to Jerusalem and stuff. But the problem was, after they set up these four little states in Jerusalem, they kind of they had like these states secure, but they didn't have the area around it secure. So there was like when people were going from place to place, they would get like robbed by brigands. There would be like um these wandering groups of Muslims who were still very upset that they were kicked out of the Holy Land, and they would take it out on the pilgrims and stuff. So this guy Hugh de Pine, he was like, well, I'm a knight, I'm a holy knight. Why don't we set up this thing where there's knights that kind of usher along and escort these pilgrims around the Holy Land? And that's the kernel of the idea that became the Templar Knights. So Hugh de Pine was the first Grand Master of the Templar Knights, and he goes to the king of um, Jerusalem. I can't remember who it was. So he goes to the king of Jerusalem, and the king of Jerusalem's like, yeah, that's a sweet idea. You know what? I'm even going to give you this super dope Temple of Solomon where you can use as your like main base. So the Temple of Solomon is like, I can't remember. It's like 1,000 years old at this point, and it was like built by Solomon himself, and it's like a super holy place. So Hugh de Pine, he gets 9 of his friends, because to be a knight you had to be like a lord, so you had to be a homeowner. And right from the get-go, I don't know if they did the Templar Knights did this on purpose, but the like kind of the precedent they set right away is one of the reasons why they got so rich. So the Templar Knights became like one solid group, and each individual in the Knights didn't own anything, but they sought, like, because they're all lords because they're knights. So like Hugh de Pine signed over all the land and stuff he owned to the Templar Knights. So it was kind of like a corporation that owned all this
Yeah.
land and stuff.
The
So
nonprofit. Maybe they
yeah,
got tax
well,
credits.
it was definitely for profit because they made a lot of profit. So just like that little thing of everybody signing over their lands and stuff is what actually
Hmm.
made the Templar Knights rich was and because they would get another thing too was they would accept donations of all types and sizes. So like if a farmer doesn't want to give up his land or because he doesn't own the land because it's a feudal system, but he has like a nice coat. He's like, I will give my coat. And then the Templars will be like, all right, you're supporting the good guys. God's going to be like, smile upon you. So another thing too was maybe people couldn't go join the Knights or they're too scared. So if they donated stuff, and a lot of people would donate things like lands and stuff that then they would still kind of get like the grace of God smile upon them and stuff. So like,
I think that happened a lot throughout history.
yeah,
Like kings were often affiliated with churches.
and actually one of the reasons that the Templar Knights were eventually brought down was they did the crime of Solomon, or not crime of Solomon. Here, I wrote it down at the end. I'm just going to look it up because this actually came around and bit them in the ass. Um, Crap, where did I write it? Oh, Simon. Okay, the crime of simony is where you basically sell ecclesiastical favor. So one thing that the knights did on the hush hush was say say there's a lord who's on his deathbed and he has all this land and he wants to make sure he goes to heaven. The Templar Knights would be like, okay, you could be a Templar brother, which basically if you're a Templar brother, you're guaranteed to go to heaven. But to be a Templar brother, you had to donate all your lands and stuff. So what they would do is they would basically give people a free get into heaven card for all their possessions and their land. And that's one of the things that came back to bite them in the trials later on was
Yeah.
because that was like one of the biggest no-nos back in the day. So
Yeah.
they didn't like it and they all did it in secret, so they were never like, if you come give us stuff you'll get into heaven, but it was kind of like an unspoken rule.
I like how weirdly confident these people are that they're just like, yeah, we know God, obviously. We can just get you some favors.
Well,
It's such a weird
actually,
concept to me. I wouldn't
yeah,
ever think of doing that myself. So I'm
yeah,
not sure how other people feel comfortable doing it, but
yeah. Okay, and then there's this guy Bernard, and at the Council of Troyes in 1128. So 1102 is like kind of the unofficial start of the Templar Knights. Like that's when Shudapan started it and got his 9 friends together. But then at the Council of Troy in 1128, 29-ish, that's when they became an official sanctioned by the Pope and Church Brotherhood of Knights, and that's when they became um, the Knights Templar. And actually, it was like people like saw them and were like, "This is the ideal endpoint of Christian nobility and stuff." And
okay.
then,
And just to check in about this,
yeah,
is it still specifically around Jerusalem? That's where we're geographically at. That's where they were.
no, the Council of Troy is back over in
Oh
France.
no, I thought you were. I don't know.
Well, it's like,
I'm
oh,
already.
sorry. Okay, I guess I should have said this before. So the Knights started
Yes.
as like guiding pilgrims and stuff in the Holy Land,
Yes.
but then
Okay.
people were coming from France and stuff, and that's where they're getting their donations. So the Knights Templar were actually spread all the way across. Like they were in
So they
France,
they grew.
yeah, and then Hugh de Pan left Jerusalem and he went back to France to find people and get recruits and stuff. So they would like, and then
Mm,
when people would donate like a little chunk of land, then the Templar Knights, then that would become property of like the Templar Knights Corporation.
yeah, you
And
said that. I just
they
was
would
lost
get
on where
they
we
would get like knights actually to
were.
run those little farms and stuff. And then the money would go into the Templar Knights Corporation.
Mhm.
And one of the things that happened at the Council of Troyes was they became exempt from tithes. Like at this point, all nobles and landowners and stuff had like the Mormon tithe system, whereas today in modern times, the Mormons they give 10% up to 10%. I don't know if this is true. That's just like one of those things, but it's like you give 10% of your wealth directly to the church as basically like like the way we pay taxes so that they build roads. I guess the idea was they would pay the church, so
Yeah.
church would help them reach heaven and stuff.
Oh, I
Um,
see. Sorry, I googled it just to see what tithing. They said what tithing.
oh, to see what they are currently.
Yeah, I can't find the amount. So
Yeah. I know in the Templar Knights thing it was 10%, and I had heard
ooh, they were in trouble a few years
who's in
ago.
trouble.
The Mormon Church was
Oh,
in trouble a few years ago. The Mormon Church has misled members on 100 billion tax-exempt investment fund.
damn.
Whistleblower alleges. So there's another topic for a later date.
Yeah. Maybe look into the Mormons. I would have gone to a Mormon church because, like, you're not supposed to go in unless you're a Mormon. And apparently, it's all like super fancy with gold and stuff. And they have like nice diamond chandeliers and stuff.
Oh, I knew a very nice Mormon girl a few years ago.
Can she
So
get me into the
actually, I've
church
known
to
a few.
scope it out?
I'm not sure.
Or
I'm
am I
not
a
sure how.
heathen and I'm not allowed through the doors?
I don't know. I'm not sure what to say about that. Sorry.
Okay. Back to the Templar Knights. So at the Council of Troy, they came up with 68 rules that were, because back then there's two different they're called the Latin rules, the 68 Latin rules, and the reason they're called the Latin rules is because they're written in Latin instead of, I guess, medieval French or whatever they had. Um, so if I'm just telling you that, so if you want to go look it up to see what these rules were, you just Google the Latin rule and it should come up. And so these rules were kind of like the guidelines on what the Templar Knights were supposed to be and how they're supposed to act. But the most important one of these rules was that it said that if you were killing enemies of the church, it was considered sinless. So this basically just gave them a wide open, like, kill anybody you want card. So they could just go, like, as long as they were an enemy of the church. So that means they can go kill anybody on the Crusades, because this came out before the second, third, fourth, and fifth, and all those Crusades. Or if they were defending like a Knights Templar castle, because they had a whole bunch of castles. If they're defending one of those and they killed somebody, they didn't have to worry about the guilt or anything. And then I'm sure they use this to their advantage by kind of finagling what actual meant to be an enemy of the church. Sorry, I just heard a car go by, so I closed that. And then the other rules that this Latin rule had was like what type of garments they could wear. They were all supposed to take vow of chastity. They weren't allowed to touch a woman in any way unless they were married.
Mm.
So that if you were married, you could become a sergeant in the Templar Knights. You couldn't be a brother in the Templar Knights. So basically, there was like two main orders
Uh,
within the order. So it's like whenever you see pictures of a guy wearing the white mantle with the red cross, that was a full-on brotherhood of the Templar Knights. But if you ever saw someone wearing black, they were just a sergeant. So this would
wait,
be
and
like
which one could marry?
the ones wearing the black.
The
So
sergeant,
yeah,
but not the
and
brother? Which
yeah,
one's a higher role?
the brother is the higher role because that's like the knight. So that's the Brotherhood of Templar. So, and then when I said before, like they
So the
people on
higher
the
one couldn't
deathbed,
marry,
yeah, the higher ones couldn't even like
and the
smooch
lower
girls
ones.
or anything.
Oh, because they'd be so
But
pure and unfettered by
yeah,
all the sexual activity.
and this would come back to haunt them because in their trials, a lot of claims of homosexuality and sodomy came in, and they were like, that's another, like, there's two crimes basically back in the old Christian, and that was the crime of simony and the crime of sodomy. So either the S's, if you did that, you were like fucking in so much trouble. So yeah,
Either the
like I was saying, the other rules they had, like one of the funnier rules was they couldn't wear pointy shoes because that was considered too extravagant, and they couldn't have shoes with laces. So basically, I just picture like these super dope knights running around in clogs.
yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
I wonder who like wore the first pointy shoe that they were just like, you know what, that looks too good. You can't.
I think pointy shoes were like way before this.
Oh, they
But
were just a
like,
thing at that time.
yeah, I think people were like, look at my pointy shoes. Ha ha ha, ha, I'm so fancy. But like,
Yeah,
yeah, and this also came too because a thing with the knights at the time, like regular knights, was they were always like had a lot of like, look how fancy I am. So they would have on like a regular knight's mantle, which is basically the big kind of half cloak. It looks like a poncho that they wore over their armor. They would have lots of like gold stitching and all this stuff, whereas the knights wouldn't. And then on
yeah,
their horses and stuff, they would have like super fancy bridles with gold trim and all
yeah.
that
I
stuff.
bet.
And the knights couldn't, and they
Show
couldn't
off for those
have
ladies.
yeah. And then their jousting sticks, I don't know
Yeah,
what those are called. They couldn't have like a fancy cover for those. They just had to be basically bare bones. And so basically they couldn't have any drip whatsoever.
yeah,
For the kids. Um So I don't know. We kind of want to keep this under an hour, so I'm not going to go through every date. I'm gonna because I found a list of every battle that the knights were in, because what happened was when the knights were given, I don't know if it was the Council of Troy. Okay, wait. I'll go to the next big date, which was 1134. Um, there was a king in what is now Spain. It was called something else back then. But back then in 1134, Spain was fighting the Moors in the Reconquista, which was kind of a crusade, kind of wasn't, because what had happened was there's a bunch of varying groups of Muslims, and they had swept south along Egypt and stuff, and they kind of came up around um, Spain in their own type of crusade, and they're trying to move into Europe from the west. So Spain was constantly like during the whole time of the crusades and the Templar Knights building, there was this war in Spain and Portugal where they're holding off the Moors. So the Templar Knights went and helped King Alfonso and his, I think,
King Alfonso.
yeah,
Yeah, I like his name.
yeah, I can't remember what I think it was at Angola or something. It was called something weird, but I'm just gonna say Spain so people know where it was. So basically the Templar Knights helped him out. And then when he died, he left a third of his kingdom to the Templar Knights. So this was like,
King Alfonso, or who did?
yeah, King Alfonso did. So he left them a bunch of temples, a bunch of land, a bunch of like treasury and stuff. And then Alfonso's like, his descendants were like, we're not fucking giving all this shit to the church. This is ours. So in the end, the Templar Knights didn't get an actual third of King Alfonso's like treasures and lands and stuff, but they got enough. Um, they got enough castles and land and stuff so that they had like a permanent base in Spain up until the end of the Templar Knights in 1302. So
All right, I
that
was trying
was
to find Alfonso on
okay.
Google. There's actually been a lot of Alfonsos, so it's
Yeah,
very hard to weed through.
I think this was Alfonso the first. So yeah, it was
Yeah,
like, and the hard part about kings and stuff in this time was, say, King Alfonso, the next guy who came in, he could have been named like Joe, and then he would just change his name to Alfonso. So he'd be Alfonso the second. And then at this time, they didn't really keep super tight records of everything. Basically, the only way you get records about all this stuff is if some nerd was following along the night's journaling and he was like, today King Alfonso did this. And that's where all these records came from. And that's it's kind of bad because
like that kid in the movie Almost Famous,
yeah, that's
where he's
exactly
just
what it
walking
is.
along behind him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
wants to be like
exactly
him,
how
but
we know. So all of this stuff I'm telling you about the Templar Knights came from diaries and stuff and official letters and stuff. So, and since they're spread out over the whole Eastern and Western Christian areas, you don't really know exactly all of the shit they got up to. So that's kind of like why people are like, they must have done all the secret shit and did like weird stuff. Okay. And then, so 1134 was super important because they got a whole bunch of kingdom. 1136, Hugh of Pan died. Robert took over. In 1139, Pope Innocent II gave out a papal bull, which basically a papal bull. I don't know why they call it a bull, but it's not like the animal bull. It's just like it's basically a papal bull is just like, here's some new rules, guys. So I guess it would be like if Trudeau or Biden was like, here's an executive order. So that's on the level they were. So this one was called the Omnidatum Optimum, which exempted the order from obedience to local laws. This ruling meant that the Templars could pass freely through all borders, were not required to pay any taxes, and were exempt from all authority except of the Pope. So this is probably the most important point in the Templar history, because now the Templars could just go wherever the fuck they want. They don't
And do
have
you
to.
know like what borders they're actually crossing, which country, or like the
Oh, this
area?
is
It's
like
just like all of
through.
Europe.
This is all of Europe, all of Jerusalem, and all that stuff, and they can go wherever they want.
Yeah.
Um, the kings can't tell them what to do. They could do whatever they want. So the way this turned out in a time, like, of course, the Templar Knights would still need to be liked by all the kings so that they could, like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. If I'll fight in your war and you fight in mine. So the
Mm-hmm.
Templar Knights would a lot of the time, like say the king of France would be like, hey, I'm gonna go over and fight a little miniature war against this group of Muslims, and the Templars will be like, oh, we'll go help you if you give us first choice of the plunder. So there'd be a lot of that where but the Templar Knights, a lot of them were still like doing this duty to look good in the grace of God. So I'm not saying all knights were like, we only care about plunder and killing people. A lot of them were still like wanted to be good Christian men and
Trying to follow, yeah, Christian
yeah, and
principles or something
do
to
good
some
and stuff.
extent,
Yeah. So
even though
um
they were killing in the name of it. It was one of those situations where people
yeah,
think they're
exactly.
killing righteously,
Yeah.
which I'm not saying I
Oh,
necessarily agree with, but
yeah. That's but this was back when people couldn't actually read the Bible because there wasn't copies of it just lying around. Like it was only written in Latin, so only the priests and super smart people could read it. And
that's true. Probably not everybody
mhm.
actually read, even, I
Yeah,
imagine.
because this was before the time of Luther, who gave the Bible to the common man with the printing press and started basically the Lutheran offshoot of the church.
Mm.
That's a whole other big pile of apples. The next important date is 1144. Um, Celestine II, which was another pope, I guess they went through them all.
So wait,
Granted,
we've only gotten like 50 years, hey, since the start
yeah,
of this, because you started 1095 to 11.
yeah.
Yeah,
We
okay.
started at 10. We've only gone 50 years, but it's kind of like only
A
the
lot
first
happened.
100 is like, this is like where everything happens. And then the next are just kind of like, okay, we're in this battle, we're in that battle. So it's like, once all this stuff was set up, then the Templar Knights were just like, kind of. So 1144, Celestine II granted Militus Temple, which basically means relief from penance at a temple. Because so what it was happening was back then, like, Christians had to go to a church like twice a day to pray and be like, dear Lord, I've sinned. This is what I've done. Please give me penance. And at this point, the Pope was like, look, we know you can't all get to like the church every day because we know you're out like gallivanting in the woods and fighting bad guys. So if you just say a couple Hail Marys on horseback, then that's good enough. So this freed up the knights to not stick close to temples and stuff. Like now they could just go out in the woods for weeks and months doing like super high risk missions and stuff. That's just what I think they're doing. Like,
Super high risk mission.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then in 1147 was the Second Crusades, where armies from Germany and France were sent to retake Odessa. and they failed horribly because there's a whole like what happened was they're gonna go overland, march through Turkey to Constantinople, and then kind of take a ship over to Jaffa and Jerusalem because Odessa was one of the countries that was one of the four states that was set up in Jerusalem, and it had fallen to Muslims. I think, yeah, it happened just before. I think it happened in 1145. Uh, this was good and bad for the Templars because since the Second Crusade ultimately failed, everybody was like, "But you had the Templar Knights, like they're the literal superheroes of the time. They should have helped you." But they kind of skirted taking the blame because they weren't in charge. It was King Louis the Seventh, and then I think it was Conrad from Germany. Basically, it was the France and German king. And the reason this is a good point for the Templar Knights was because while they were marching through the mountains in Turkey, they were attacked by some Turkish people who were like, "Get the fuck out of here. Like, you can't just walk through here on your way to wherever." So, what happened was like it was the same as before. Like, it's a whole bunch of pilgrims, a couple knights, and then like 50 Knights Templar were like walking with them. And up until this point, the Knights Templar were still very separate. They were just kind of like helping out. So while they're marching with King Louis the Seventh, they get attacked, and then they have to fall back. And then King Louis is like, "Oh my God, what are we gonna do?" And he's all scared. But what happens is the Knights kind of take over, and it's not officially clear if like Louis was like Knights take over or if they're like we're taking over. But what happened was there was 50 of them, and they each kind of took 1,000 men each and set up 50 different little um troops in the army. And like they like took like a week and they trained them. They're like, "All right, you guys, you got to do this and that." And basically these were just farmers who didn't know anything. So even like a week of being like, "Okay, when people are charging you, don't run, and if you all stand together, they won't get you." So even that little amount of tutelage by the Templars helped them out a lot, and they ended up getting Louis to Constantinople, and then he could sail down to Jaffa or whatever. So at that point, they were like they had signed over um like leadership of their army to the Templars, and it worked. So this would happen a lot more where they would like where the Templar Knights weren't just by themselves attacking stuff, they would get armies and stuff from the kings underneath them that they could help bolster their troops with. So that was another big thing that happened. Um, and then I want to jump ahead to 1153. This is because even though the knights were gaining all this reputation and stuff, a lot of people were like, "We hate the knights. They're just killing people. They're like the bad guys." So it's like some badness was mounting, and then there was this battle in 1153 called the Siege of Ascalon. And I want to talk about this one because it's like one of the better battles because it's the most interesting. So the knights were, and I think it was this was part of the Reconquista. I think. Well, anyways, so the knights and the regular army are trying to take this castle or this keep. So what they do is they're like beating themselves up against the wall and they're getting nowhere. So the king of Jerusalem sends all ships that are entering the kingdom of Jerusalem, he sends them down to Ascalon. And then like, well, he doesn't send them. He keeps the people in Jerusalem, gives them money, takes their ships, sends it down to Ascalon, and then the army there strips all the ships, takes like the mast poles and stuff, and they build this huge siege tower besides the regular tower. So it's like as tall as the regular tower. And they cover it with hides and stuff so that you can't, so that the people that were in the stone tower couldn't burn it down. So like the way this did good was that now that they have this tower that's as high as the stone tower, they could climb up and they could shoot arrows back and forth, and they didn't have the disadvantage of being below. So this battle's so good because it's like it's a good it's like a good it's got like 5 different moral of the stories, and one of the moral of the stories is like how they took, sorry, I'm just gonna take a sip because I'm getting hoarse. So do you
Thanks
follow me?
Yeah, thanks for
Okay.
sharing all this today.
Okay.
It's interesting. I'm not going to say I've retained everything. I
Oh, that's
apologize
fine.
for that.
Hey, that's
Coming
why
in
we're
fresh.
recording.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot here.
Yeah, I'm
That's
trying
new.
not to. I'm trying not to do too many facts and stuff, and that's probably just my excuse for being like, oh, I don't remember this or research that. But it's like if I was just like hitting you with a wall of facts, I'd be like, go listen to that Dan guy's book, and it's super dry and has a lot of facts in it. This is more just give you a grasp of what the Templar Knights were,
Yeah,
and we're like almost running out of time. What time is it? 4:30. We started. When did we start this? 3:30.
3:45.
Okay, so we got
Do you want to
like,
go like 15 more minutes?
yeah.
Probably.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to cut this short, but
You might
I'll
have two
talk
parts.
about.
This will be a 2-part talk.
Hey, that's no problem. We're like the second half can be all about like the demise and stuff. So, oh yeah, the Battle of Ascalon. So they build this tower and they're shooting back and forth. And I was saying how there's 5 like morals of the story in this one battle, and one of the morals is
I like
repurpose your
morals.
stuff. Yeah. So another thing is like basically find a different way to use what you had to win, and that was stripping all these boats and taking their mass and building this huge siege tower
Yeah, that was
because
clever, actually. I thought that when
yeah,
you told that story. Yeah, clever
so they're
strategy.
yeah, so they're fighting back and forth, and then the people in the stone tower, they're like running out of supplies and stuff, and they're like, fuck, we got to get rid of this siege tower. So they like kind of throw like tiki torches at it and like Molotov cocktails or the equivalent back then, which would just be like a ball of pitch. And it wasn't get like the flames weren't catching on because it was like treated mass from the ships and they had wrapped it all in thick hide. So the people in the stone fort were like, let's get everything we have that can burn and throw it over the side of the tower. This is where the second moral of the story is. And the second moral of the story is like, don't go all in on a dumb idea because it could bite you in the ass.
Yeah, because then there's nothing left.
Yeah.
Does
So
that what
they
happened?
put, yeah. So basically, they put everything that you can use as a fuel source, like sticks, branches, chairs, probably tables, old wood, and they just were piling it up between the stone fort and the wood fort. And then at
Yeah.
night, they pour a whole bunch of pitch and oil on this big pile and they light it on fire. And they're like, that's got to burn through the hide. But the shitty thing they never thought about was the breeze coming in off the bay was coming to the back of the wood tower and blew the flames back at the stone tower. So what happened was they ended up fucking themselves because they superheated their own stone bricks with this giant fire,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then like the fire, and it didn't break the tower or whatever. So this is where the second moral is: don't put everything into a bad idea, because it backfired. Because now not only did it not burn down the wood tower, but it weakened their walls and stuff. So it's like their walls were all cracked and stuff. And then
Yeah.
it had cooled off. And then when the sun came up and kind of re-warmed up the stone, just the sunlight itself, it caused it all to just crumple. And so like this like
There were no engineers involved in this stuff
no. Well, because
anymore
this
there.
this was back when people didn't know like high physics of even like stone, where
You know
like
what though? That's just a life experience thing, thinking about wind, right? Like, oh, which
mhm,
direction is the wind blowing when I start this fire?
yeah,
And
because if
then
you
you think
yeah,
somebody would have known about stone. I feel like there were people that knew about that, just perhaps not on this actual
yeah,
uh
because there would have been
team of
masons and stuff.
fighters. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's like moral number 3 is listen to the guy who's telling you you're fucking the stones in
Yeah,
your own
there was
wall.
probably one guy there just being like, I don't think this
Yeah.
is a good idea. And they were like, shut up.
Yeah. Listen to educated voices, because somebody would have been like, look, maybe we shouldn't. But one thing about stone is if you heat it, it expands and then it cools and it contracts. So it would have
Yeah.
heated up from the fire, then expanded, and then kind of cracked all the mortar and stuff. And then as it sunk back, it, it would have done that. And then that just the heat from the sun would have hit it again. So it all like crumpled down. And then what are we on? Moral number 4? Yeah, because there's the
Repurpose your stuff. Don't
repurpose your
go all
stuff.
in on a stupid idea.
Yeah, don't go all on a stupid idea. Listen to educated people who might
Well,
give you
not
a
maybe
second
not
opinion.
educated, more like, I don't know, intelligent, reasonable people. Just
Yeah.
because you
Okay.
can't always qualify it with academic
How
education,
about
right?
experienced voices? How about instead of listen to experienced or educated voices, we say listen to experienced voices?
Yeah, experience could be good. Yeah,
Okay.
education can fall under that category, I suppose.
So now moral number 4 is coming in, because when that fell, the Templar Knights, because it fell like kind of like first thing in the morning at first light. So not everybody was ready to go. But since Templar Knights were like always
Wait, the whole thing
basically,
fell?
so
So
yeah, the
you said it
wall
all
like
crumbled?
crumbled and
Just
fell.
totally crumbled. And were there
Yes.
men like on top of it? They were like
Uh,
at the top or what?
there probably would
Because
have been a
they're
couple. Well, they probably were away because the fire, so they didn't want to get burned. So this
oh
was the
right.
middle of the night. So,
Yeah.
and back then, like people didn't really have
Okay.
floodlights, so they weren't fighting and stuff. There would have been
That
like,
detail might not have been in the story if you read
no,
them.
it
Just like
wasn't.
asking. Okay, fair enough.
And then since Templar Knights are like Johnny on the spot, like firemen, they're just like ready to go. They all got ready as soon as they heard, like, because it was like a monstrous noise. So the Templar Knights would have been like, oh shit, the wall fell. Let's go. Let's go get our plunder. So moral number 4 is don't be greedy, because what happened was um Bernard de Tremblay, who's the Grand Master of the Templars at this point, him and 40 Templars charged through the hole in the wall with no support staff. And the reason they did that was, well, they don't know exactly why, but one of the reasons they thought was because these knights were like, because it was basically like what you kill, you keep back then. Like I was before when I said,
Yeah.
whoever you
Who you kill?
kill, yeah,
Yeah.
who you kill, you get to keep the plunder. So the knights got greedy and they wanted to plunder this whole kind of fortress to themselves. So they all ran through the hole in the wall. And then the people inside kind of blocked it off behind them. Like, I guess when I said that they had thrown everything that was wood into this fire pile, they kept some like planks and stuff. So they blocked off behind the knights. So the knights couldn't get out. And there was like 10,000 people or whatever in this fort. And then they basically just murdered all the knights. Of course, the knights probably put up a good fight, but so there's your moral number 4 is don't get greedy, because you could get beheaded by a whole bunch of people. And I think,
Yeah.
and
Among other things.
yeah, and then the gross medieval part of this is it took the army a whole nother week to take over this, because basically once that wall fell, they couldn't build up enough structure to keep everybody out. So they're like shooting arrows through the hole, and they kind of basically overwhelmed them. Then the whole army came through, and when they came through, all the Templar knights that had just been laying where they'd been dead, or they were like hanging them up and stuff. Because like back then they did a lot of like mind tactics where they would just like take a dead body and string it up. So it's like as you were going to fight, you'd have to see your
Yeah.
fighting brothers hanging there, and you'd be like, oh, and then you wouldn't
Yeah.
want to fight as bad.
Remember we learned that when we were in England that they used to put like heads on that bridge
Oh
to
yeah.
scare people coming in. Yeah.
Oh, everything. Every time I learn about the Middle Ages, I just think of how
I'm
bad it stunk like dead people.
just
Yeah.
how unfun this
Mhm.
whole thing you're talking about sounds terrible to me. I think I'd rather just die like at the start of it and not have to just live worried all the time.
Yeah,
It
that
sounds so
sounds
stressful to me.
terrible. Hmm.
Yeah. Like zombie apocalypse life. I'd rather just die at the start of it too.
Okay. Um. So we're okay. So, oh, another thing I want to cover was, this will be the last thing I cover. and then we'll do a part 2 and we'll take over from. So we're at, where are we? We're at 1153.
Oh yeah,
We have
making
we have
progress.
yeah, we have
Not very
150
quickly, but still there.
years. We have 150 years of Templar Knight left, but like I keep saying, it's all not like, it's all of this big stuff happened in the first 50 years. And the last piece of the puzzle that made the Templar Knights so rich was they operated as a bank. Like what would happen was they would, since they didn't have to listen to kings and they could go anywhere, what they could do was they could take money in, say, Spain. Like some farmer could be like, my cousin is in Jerusalem and he needs $100. So he would give a Templar Knight in Spain $100, and then the Templar Knight would like send a letter or like a carrier pigeon or something to
Yeah,
Jerusalem,
they're
and they'd
like a
be like,
fraternity,
yeah, they
like a
would be
little
like,
frat club.
yeah. So they were like Western Union and a bank all wrapped up, because they would send that money to the cousin. And then another thing they would do was, since they were getting all this money and basically stockpiling it, because they would I can't I don't know if they ever broke it down, but the Templar Knights, they would always like, they would take all the money they had from their serfs and their lands and their treasures, and they would use it to fund the Templar Order and like them going to war and stuff. But they would also have savings, so they would lend kings
Smart.
money and stuff. But the thing was, back then, this runs into the whole how Jewish people became the bad people back in the Middle Ages. Was Jewish people, the Christian faith wouldn't allow you to lend money for profit. So by the Christian faith, the Templar Knights couldn't lend kings money, then demand like interest on those loans.
Okay.
But they could still be like, I'm only lending you this money if you scratch my back. Like, it's that whole thing again.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
if a king's like, give me $500,000 or whatever the equivalent in silver was back then, the Templar Knights could be like, no, you're not going to be able to pay it back. And then the king would be like, okay, if you lend me $500,000, I will give you this like village. And they're like, okay. So they take the village and they give them $500,000 or some large amount back then.
Hmm.
And this is actually one of the other reasons that caused the Templar Knights to get in trouble with King Philip IV. So I think we're at a good spot here. What do you think so far? Was that just too much information?
Uh, no, not too much.
The only problem is, now that we're going to do the second episode of the Templar Knights, is you have to be there for the second episode too.
Yeah, I might. Yeah, I'll come a little more prepared. I think
No, you don't have to be prepared.
I'll digest some of this and
Yeah.
yeah. So
Um,
interesting though. But I like I said, I think they sound like a fraternity. You said bank, and I think they sound like a frat club. They sound like a bunch of boys running around like
oh yeah, definitely. Like, they were the the thing was, they kind of just little by little became all this stuff without people realizing. Like, if they were like lending people money by themselves, that wouldn't matter. But it's like the fact that they didn't have to pay tithes to the church, the fact that they could go anywhere they want and didn't have to answer to kings, the
do you think
fact.
they did some good though? Like your
Oh,
opinion of what
definitely.
you,
Like,
yeah. So it's not just they're not just like corrupt or whatever. Like
yeah,
they're trying to do good periodically and
I
maybe
guess.
help some people along
Yeah,
the way. Is
looking
that the
back at
point?
it.
Is that the
Yeah,
point of them?
yeah, the whole point of them was like, their first point with Hugh DePayan, who I see as like just a super good guy, when they started out guiding pilgrims and protecting pilgrims from roving brigands and stuff like that. They still did all that. Like, they still offered people protection. They would like they would actually take, like, if pilgrims wanted to go from Germany to Jerusalem, they would kind of journey with them the whole
Mm,
way.
yeah.
So they were
At a
based,
time when
yeah,
people had no police,
yeah, and it was like
they kind of stepped
they
up.
were big escorts and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was nice because they also, their fortresses and all their castles were still operating churches, so pilgrims could go there and they could like do their church stuff, and then they could like, and people could all, and like they were super popular too because people would just like if you were a peasant and you had nothing, you could be like, I'm just going to go be a Templar Knight. But you would just be like the sergeant part. You could just go, like you could just go be like a stable hand for the Templar Knights and just go look after their horses, and you would still be guaranteed all this ecclesiastical favor. So that was like a big
Probably
draw
also
to a lot of people.
practical favor, like
Yeah.
them, whatever, looking out for
Mhm.
you. If you have beef with somebody in your neighborhood, they probably,
Oh yeah, and the other thing
you know,
too is like
come to your side.
you have all these like, the other thing is you have all these like rich kings and stuff who are like, they're like, we're kings because God said we're kings. And they're like, a lot
Yeah.
of them had bad reputations of being womanizers and basically scoundrels. Whereas you had the Templar Knights who were like all super pious dudes who were like, we don't even like pointed shoes. We're not going to go around carousing and stuff. So they were like your bros. Like you're like, you could always trust them and stuff. So it was like the ideal version of them was they were the ultimate good guy. Like
Yeah.
it was like having a whole bunch of Captain Americas running around with you.
You know how I feel about Captain America.
I know you love Captain America.
I mean, he's old now. They don't make
Yeah.
movies with him anymore, but
Yeah. But
still, he's a stand-up guy.
well, do you like the actor or do you like the
No,
character?
I like the character. Yeah, yeah. I like
Mhm.
the character. I like his old, old school values.
Yeah.
No swearing.
Wait, are you telling me you'd like me more if I didn't swear?
No.
Me and my farm boy mouth?
Yeah, yeah. No, you do it in a humorous way.
Yeah.
But
Oh, thanks. Okay, so we'll leave off there. I'm just going to make a mark on my notes. That is actually a really good spot to take to leave off because the main enemy, like at this whole point of the Crusades and stuff, uh, the Muslims weren't just like sitting around too. Like they were like doing all this stuff. And there's this guy, Saladin, that's the anglicized version of his name, and I'm sorry if that offends anybody, but that's just what they call him in all the stuff I was reading. Saladin is this great Muslim leader who unites all the warring factions of the Muslims and then heads in to help to like take over Jerusalem. And we'll talk about him taking Damascus in 1174. We'll start talking about Saladin. Saladin? Saladin? Ah.
I don't know. We should look up the pronunciation of that probably.
There's like six different pronunciations. There's like
Oh,
Saladin, and then yeah, I guess I
yeah.
could say Saladin. That's probably, but because it's written Saladin, and I say
Mm.
Saladin because I'm so used to saying Aladdin.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
he's passed away now. Does he care how we say it? I don't know.
Mhm.
Typically, you try to say the name how a person says it, just out of
Yeah.
respect.
I
But
guess I just don't want to disrespect anybody who is Muslim
yeah,
who might be listening to this and stuff because it's and that's the whole other thing too about history is like it's like you look back at the Templar Knights and you kind of want to just be like the good guys, but at the same time there's nothing that would make the Muslims that they're displacing out of Jerusalem the bad
yeah,
guys, because to them it's also the holy land, and to them they also want to get the holy favor from owning it and stuff. So it's like you can't even like pick sides. It's just like two groups fighting over the same thing. So,
that's a very, very important point about war in
mhm.
general, is that both sides often feel justified.
Yeah, I guess the best thing you could say is both sides are bad. Both sides are the bad guys because they can't both be the good guys. Well, you can't say they're both bad either, but
Yeah, no, you can't.
I guess
We don't
the
really know.
yeah,
We don't know who started it.
the only real
Two
thing
wrongs
you
don't
could
make a
say,
right, though.
yeah, the only thing you could say is both sides are both sides. Like
Yeah.
one side's an army, the other side's an army too. Um, okay, so what do you think of the Templar Knights so far?
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. Good stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing more.
Are you glad I talked you into being on this podcast?
Uh, yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Sorry if it was boring.
No, my eyes only glazed over once for a few minutes. It's a lot to
Okay.
take in.
Okay.
But how
Uh,
excited you are is very endearing.
I hope that translates to the listeners as well. Also, I just wanted to say if you've listened to just the audio version of this, I will try to put in visual pictures and stuff on the video. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or whatever, just go check out the video on YouTube, skim through it. I'll try to put pictures and stuff in. I think there was a part where I was trying to think of a word, so I'll put that word in there in the subtext, not
Yeah,
subtext,
I have a couple
subtitles.
notes for what we can
Yeah.
clarify.
And also, like, we only covered 50 years so far, but there was so much stuff that happened in that 50 years that I just skimmed over and stuff. So if this piques your interest at all, just delve right in, because the one thing I've learned about medieval history is there's so much. Like the 50 books of the first 50 years of the Templar Knights, you could write like 2 books on everything that happened. Just like like I didn't really get into it because it's not that interesting to me, but there's a whole bunch of like political favor and stuff going back and forth, like that guy I was talking about, Bernard, um of what was his name? Um yeah, there's this guy Bernard at the Council of Troyes. Remember I like mentioned him? He has a huge part in it because he's like, but I didn't want to go into it because it's all like back and forth. Like him and Hugh the Pan were like buds, and then like they kind of did one thing for each other, and yeah. So there's a lot of nuance, like even just the way like all these things, like I was saying, like things just kind of happen to fall in place for the Templar Knights, like how they got like those papal bulls written for them and stuff. Like each one of those came because the knights did a whole bunch of favors for the Pope and the kings at the time. So it wasn't like it was just happening out of nowhere. Like they're putting in the footwork. So if you want to like look into all of that. And even though I was shit talking this the Templars book by Dan Jones, it is a good listen to. Get the audio book. And if you could find Scott Wolter's book, that sounds super interesting because he goes into like all the like woo woo secret society part of the Templars, but I couldn't find the book. Anything else before we go?
No, thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast, Dale.
No
It was a
problem.
lot of fun. Yeah. And hope everybody else out there enjoyed this as well.
Mm-hmm. First guest of the Dale Show. It's a big honor.
Do I get a mug? That's the question.
You can have every single mug I own since we
Already.
live together.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I will get you a mug because if I
Yeah.
get you a Dale Show mug, I'd be getting myself a Dale Show mug too. So yeah, I guess I have to
There
come
you
up
go.
with a logo
Win
and make
win.
mugs.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just gave me an open permission slip to just make a whole bunch of swag for the podcast and put it in
Yes.
the house.
Merch. Get your merch, folks.
I don't really have a way to sign this off because I'm only 4 episodes in.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Take care. So good to not fully see all of you, but hope you're there anyway.